The world is a complex and interconnected place, and we ignore its interdependencies at our peril. You hear that kind of quote a lot, don't you?
Mm-hmm. Seems fitting.
Yeah, it feels really relevant for what we're digging into today. The pretty intricate relationship between India and Canada.
Definitely.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We're going to try and unpack a relationship that's, well, it's hit some serious turbulence recently.
That's right. And we'll explore if there's a genuine chance for a quote-unquote reset, especially with the upcoming G7 summit visit.
Exactly. Our focus is Prime Minister Modi's expected trip to Canada for the G7 Leaders Summit. What could this signal after, such a frosty period?
And we're mainly drawing on a recent report from AFP, but also bringing in perspectives from the Hindu and the Times of India to get a fuller picture.
Right. So our mission here in this deep dive is to really dissect the layers, understand the dynamics, the core issues, and crucially, what this complex international dance means for you.
Yeah, whether you're maybe studying for exams, something like the UPSC, where bilateral relations are core current affairs.
Or even if you're just curious about what's happening on the global stage, this is important stuff.
We'll be critically looking at the points these sources raise, trying to give you a clearer sense of the forces pulling these nations together, but also the big hurdles still keeping them apart.
Okay, let's dive in. To really get the potential for a reset, we first need to remember the low point. It wasn't that long ago.
No, it wasn't. 2023 was, let's just say, relations really soured. A sharp downturn between Delhi and Ottawa.
Defined by tension.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And a real chill in diplomatic engagement.
And the specific trigger, the flashpoint.
Well, it was the accusation from Canada's then Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Very public.
Pointing the finger directly at New Delhi over the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. That was quite something.
An explosive moment, yeah. And India's response, as the sources detail, was immediate and strong. A consistent denial of any involvement.
Which created that major diplomatic rift we saw.
Exactly. Scaled back embassy staff, canceled talks, just a general freeze impacting, well, lots of things.
So that was the low point. But now something's shifted. There's talk of an opening.
It seems so. The key factor is the invitation from Ottawa's new Prime Minister, Modi-Carney. He's invited Prime Minister Modi to the G7 summit in Canada.
And that invitation itself is being read as significant.
By some, yes. As a deliberate gesture, perhaps. A way to try and turn the page.
The sources seem to reflect that. Harsh Vardhan Shringla, India's former top diplomat, he's quoted, calling this a real chance to reset things.
And Ashok Malik from the Asia Group, he put it, this is a new moment. He said, a gesture has been made by Canada, and it has been reciprocated by India.
Just the act of inviting and accepting.
After all the recent tension, yeah, it speaks volumes.
Now, just to clarify for everyone listening, India isn't actually a member of the G7, right?
Correct. The members of the big economies, Britain, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the U.S.
But India gets invited quite often.
Yes. Since 2019, India has been a regular invitee. Given its size, most populous nation, fifth biggest economy, its presence is seen as important.
So the invitation isn't totally new, but the context is.
Precisely. Coming after the deep freeze of 2023, this invitation takes on a different weight. It fuels that whole reset narrative.
And the sources suggest there are some very pragmatic reasons behind Canada extending this invitation now. Economics seems key.
Oh, absolutely. India's economic heft is a huge factor. Malik is quoted pretty bluntly on this. India is being called to the G7 because of its weight and size as an economy.
It's not just about today's economy either, is it? It's the potential.
Right. India's growth trajectory, its role in, diversifying global supply chains away from maybe just China.
Yeah.
That's a big draw.
Especially now with all the uncertainty in global markets, threats of U.S. tariffs, things like that.
Exactly. For G7 nations looking for stable partners, engaging with a major growing economy like India just makes strategic sense.
Which brings us neatly to the actual economic ties between India and Canada. They're already quite substantial, aren't they?
They are. Trade was around $9 billion in 2023.
Okay, $9 billion. That's not small change.
Not at all. And the source mentions specifics. India exporting things like electrical machinery, pharmaceuticals, iron products.
While Canada sends fertilizer, pulses, essential goods flowing both ways. Yeah.
But maybe the most striking number is the investment figure.
Ah, yes, the Canadian pension funds.
Yeah. They've apparently invested, cumulatively, around $55 billion in India.
$55 billion. Wow, that's a massive commitment.
It really is, and it's long-term capital. It's not just about buying and selling goods. It's institutional money making a big bet on India's future.
Shringla's quote comes to mind here, calling this India's window of opportunity, expecting decades of growth.
Exactly. He talks about India offering greater demand, a larger market, talent, technology, and services. You can see why that $55 billion is flowing in.
So that huge investment creates a powerful economic reason, almost an imperative, for Canada to want stability in the relationship, right?
You'd think so. It provides a strong undercurrent, pushing for engagement, even when the political side is rocky.
Now, Modi's visit, his first to Canada since 2015, which is quite a gap.
It is.
It also fits into a wider picture, doesn't it? Especially thinking of Canada's relationship with the U.S.
Yes, the potential Trump factor, as you called it earlier. The source suggests Ottawa might be looking to, well, shore up other relationships, maybe insulate its economy a bit from potential U.S. protectionism under Trump. He's expected at the G7, too.
And India has its own U.S.-related goals for the summit.
Seems so. Modi is reportedly hoping for a meeting with Trump, the aim. Pushing a trade deal with the U.S., which is India's biggest trading partner, before a July deadline for potential U.S. tariffs to kick back in. Big ones, like 26%.
Okay, so both Canada and India have reasons related to potential U.S. trade shifts to perhaps cooperate more closely with each other?
That's the argument. The Times of India editorial connected these dots, saying, for Canada, mutually beneficial ties with India make sense today, given how the Trump administration has upended Washington-Ottawa ties.
And
Add to this Trump's propensity to weaponize tariffs, and both India and Canada have enough reasons to cooperate on trade.
it really shows how external pressures can sometimes push countries together, even when they have serious bilateral issues.
Definitely a key dynamic here.
But all this talk of economic drivers and strategic alignment doesn't just make the original problem disappear, does it?
Not at all. You can't ignore the elephant in the room, the unsolved investigation into Hardeep Singh Nijjar's assassination in 2023.
Yeah.
That's the core issue that led to the breakdown.
And it's incredibly sensitive in Canada, specifically because of the large Sikh community there.
Right. Canada is home to the largest Sikh diaspora outside India, and within that community, there are activists advocating for Khalistan.
The sources describe Khalistan as a fringe separatist movement aiming for an independent state carved out of India, dating back decades.
And linked in the past, according to the reports, to some serious violence, mentioning a PM's assassination, a passenger jet bombing. India views it very seriously.
India has banned the movement, calls key leaders like Nijjar terrorists.
Well, Canada's explosive accusation was that India was directing a campaign on Canadian soil, targeting Sikh activists, intimidation, threats, even violence.
That's a huge accusation. Interference with sovereignty, citizen safety.
Absolutely. Which is why protests are expected if Modi visits, and why, the source notes, Carney's invitation actually angered some Canadian Sikh groups they felt betrayed.
So given this incredibly tense backdrop, how are they even approaching dialogue? Do the sources give any clues?
They suggest slightly different approaches, perhaps. Canada mentioned an agreement to continue law enforcement dialogue and discussions addressing security concerns. Kind of formal, process-oriented.
Focusing on the legal law enforcement track.
Seems like it. India, on the other hand, appears to see the leadership change in Canada. Carney replacing Trudeau as a chance for a broader discussion.
Moving past the fury, as the source puts it, directed at Trudeau.
Potentially. India seems willing to discuss the Nijjar probe, yes, but they also want to bring their own security concerns to the table.
Which are?
Concerns about alleged criminal gangs linked to some of these fringe groups, operating, they say, in both countries.
Okay, so a two-way street on security concerns.
That seems to be India's position. Shringla is quoted saying India has always offered cooperation on these issues, provided everything is on the table to protect mutual interests and security concerns.
And he had specific words about Carney.
Called him a very mature individual who views things from a larger perspective, suggesting maybe a hope for a more pragmatic, less politically charged conversation under the new leadership.
Interesting framing. But despite these hopes and the economic push, there's also a need for realism here, right?
Very much so. The Hindu newspaper's editorial provided that dose of caution.
What did they say?
Essentially, that Modi's trip, even if it goes ahead smoothly, is only a first step. A necessary one, but just the start.
And they warned against expecting too much too soon.
Exactly. Quote, "It would be naive to imagine that these issues can be resolved in a summit." It highlights that these are deep, sensitive problems, no quick fixes.
But they still urged engagement.
Strongly. They called it imperative to get ambassadors back to full strength, restart those stalled trade talks. The message was clear. Use every chance to reset ties, even if progress is slow.
So avoidance isn't really an option given everything else at stake?
Seems that way. The economic and strategic drivers are just too compelling to let the relationship completely stall, despite the serious security disagreements.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this for everyone listening. If you're trying to make sense of this, maybe for UPSC prep focusing on current affairs, or just to understand global politics, what does this deep dive really tell us?
Well, I think it really underscores that global diplomacy is rarely simple, is it? This potential reset isn't just about leaders deciding to be friendly again.
No, it's pushed by powerful forces.
Right. Big economic forces, that huge $55 billion investment figure, India's growth potential, the need for diverse supply chains.
And strategic needs too, like Canada maybe hedging against U.S. policy shifts or India seeking trade deals.
Those are the powerful currents pulling them together. But, as we've discussed, they're constantly hitting up against these really deep-seated issues.
The Nijjar investigation being the main one.
Absolutely. And the fundamentally different ways that two countries seem to view security, sovereignty, and how to handle sensitive diaspora politics, like the Khalistan issue.
So the key takeaway, especially if you're analyzing this for something like an exam, is you have to look beyond the headlines, don't you?
You really do. You need to see the complex interplay. Economics, security, history, domestic politics in both countries, plus how wider global events like U.S. trade policy influence things. It's multidimensional.
It's like a puzzle with constantly shifting pieces.
It is. And it shows how nations often find themselves needing to cooperate economically and strategically, even while they're grappling with these profound, often emotional disagreements on security and sovereignty. The sources really paint that nuanced picture.
Yeah, this look at the AFP report and the other perspectives really brings that complexity to life. So, wrapping up the core tension here, the G7 visit presents a clear opportunity, driven by economics and strategy, for India and Canada to try and mend fences.
A real window, potentially.
But those major unresolved security issues, the Nijjar case, the Khalistan concern, they are massive obstacles. They haven't gone away and won't be solved overnight just because leaders meet.
They represent deep fault lines in the relationship.
Which leaves us and you with something to think about. How do countries actually do this balancing act in the real world? How do they manage the urgent need for economic partnership and strategic alignment when they have these deeply sensitive security clashes and fundamentally different takes on major events?
Yeah. Can a relationship truly reset and rebuild trust if those core disagreements, that underlying mistrust, just simmers beneath the surface?
It's a tough question, and it's one that will likely define India-Canada relations for some time to come. Really shows the tightrope walk of modern diplomacy.
It certainly does.
Well, if you found this deep dive helpful for understanding this complex topic, maybe you're tracking current affairs closely, perhaps for exams, we'd really appreciate it if you'd consider liking and subscribing.
It helps us keep bringing these analyses to you. And please, do leave a comment. We'd love to hear your thoughts or any further questions you might have on India-Canada ties or related issues.
Your questions really do help us figure out what topics to tackle next.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time with another critical topic to unpack.